All right, Donna.
Hey, Oliver, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. I told you it's just like a regular old inspection, right? Expect
Just
the
like an
unexpected.
inspection. If everything could go right, that would be too easy, right? That would be too
Right.
easy. Well, I know that while we wait, there are some polls that we want to launch until we get everyone sorted.
Yes.
So let's walk through those, and then perhaps once we have the full team on the line, we can add some additional commentary. So for those
Absolutely.
of you that are on the line here, there's a little notification that you're going to have pop up in the bottom left hand of your screen that says visit the polls tab, and we're going to open up the first poll. Donna, do you want me to read through the poll here?
Yeah, I can do it if you want to.
Go for it. Go for it.
Sure. All right. Hey, everybody. I'm Donna Dorozinsky from Just in Time GCP. Thank you, Oliver, for having us out. I have a really cool panel backstage trying to sort through some technology challenges. But in the meantime, how many of you out there have had a regulatory inspection in the past 2 years? So 0. Oh, looks like 0 is already hitting pretty big here. 1, 2, or those poor people at 3 or greater. Or should I say those lucky people?
That's it. That's how you look at it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, numbers are climbing.
Yeah, still the 0 as the leader, but we've got 1 inspection sort of coming up fast behind everyone. Seems like a real mix, which is cool.
Awesome. So wow, 7 people are hit the trifecta or better, 3 or more. That's a lot of inspections, right? Hopefully there weren't what we call the duplicate win, where you get 2 bodies at the same time. All right, so maybe let's hit that second question. Are you anticipating an inspection in the next 18 months? Yes or no?
Let's see them come in.
Oh, wow.
There you go.
There's a lot of you. Oh, good. We're going to have some really cool tips here for you. You're actually going to get to talk to some people who have had inspections recently. So, all right. Definitely heavily weighted to those who are expecting an inspection.
All right. So let's move on to our third poll.
Third question is, do you or have you used storyboarding or some type of gap assessment in preparation for your inspections? Well, a lot of you are. Well, let's get a little more balanced. Looks like the yes pulls ahead.
Yeah. All right. Perfect. I know that there's going to be lots to talk about here. And then the fourth poll.
All right. So when you think about what keeps you up at night, what are you most worried about in terms of that potential inspection? Is it an incomplete or poor quality TMF? A study team that is not prepared, study team turnover, we don't have an inspection plan, we don't have a good understanding of what our vendor or CRO did, we have not determined our inspection lead, or nothing. I feel great about the arrival of our inspector. Bring it on.
1 vote already.
All right, I love it.
But a clear winner.
Yeah. Incomplete or poor quality TMF. All right, well, that's some scary stuff. That can be very scary. All right, well, we're going to try and do some things to give you guys some ideas about what you can do for any of those things that are keeping you up at night. That's for sure. Are we ready, Oliver, to bring them in?
I'm going to move everybody on stage here.
Okay.
Kim, could you move everybody on stage? I can't seem to add Mario. Mario, if you hit go to stage on the right-hand side. All right. So we don't have everyone, but we have most. So Donna, I'll hand it over to you, and I think the rest of the gang will start to follow.
All right, awesome. Well, the party's almost ready to get started, but in the meantime, I have hopefully 4 amazing guests to join me today, but we'll get started with Jay, if you don't mind introducing yourself, and then Mario, and then Anjali, and hopefully by then we'll have Sharon. Go ahead, Jay.
Sure. Thanks, Donna. So hi, everyone. I'm Jay Russick. I am a Senior Director of Clinical Operations here at CROs Therapeutics. We're a small company, about 150 people, pre-commercial, have a handful of candidates in different stages of clinical development. I've been through a number of regulatory inspections, both FDA and ex-US, MHRA, EMA, et cetera, over my career. I've spanned from larger biotech at Biogen to more of the smaller stage biotechs and preparing for inspections, and have focused heavily a lot, of course, on the TMF and the use of the TMF. So really looking forward to partaking in this panel discussion today. I'll hand it over to Mario.
Thank you. My name is Mario Cadavid. I'm a consultant. I have a consulting company called Cadavid Consulting LLC. Overall, I've seen a number of inspections in the past for both small and large pharmaceutical companies. In the beginning, it was a lot of paper documentation, and then we moved to electronic, as we have seen in the industry. My areas of expertise are in the quality area and the GCP side, from managing the compliance of inspections all the way up to good documentation practices. So I'll turn it over to Anjali.
Hello, everyone. Thrilled to be here today with all of you. I am Dr. Anjali Malhotra, and in my current role, I serve as the Senior Vice President of Clinical Development and QA at Immunity Bio, Inc. I have over 35 years of experience in the industry, in GCPs, GLPs, CLIA regulations, both in the US and globally. I work on two main principles, which is never stop continuously improving your processes, and two, doing what's right when no one is watching. I'm really looking forward to the session today.
So thank you guys all for joining me. We've had some great discussions in preparation for this. I don't know if you guys saw the outcome of the poll, but we have quite a few people out there that are expecting inspections in the next 18 months. And it turns out the biggest thing keeping people awake is actually the completeness of their TMF, with an overwhelming response, a high number of people. So I think some of our questions will fit nicely with those concerns and in planning. I'm going to start with my first question for everyone. And so my first question is, how has preparation for regulatory inspections changed over your career? So all of us have been in the industry a long time, and we've seen inspection change. And what looks different today than what you did maybe 10 or 15 years ago? Jay, do you want to start?
Sure. So obviously, I think it's common sense, but we've obviously moved to a much more electronic and digital focus. And that really changes from start to finish. How do you prepare? How do you achieve the golden state of inspection readiness? And how do you actually go through an inspection? Obviously, we're no longer, or most of us are no longer, I shouldn't say no one. I think there are still studies out there running paper, but the majority of what we do day in and day out is in the electronic space. So how do you go about and making sure that you have that story to tell of your study or your program, but with the trail of having those electronic breadcrumbs? And I think that really changes our mindset, because everything is actually a lot more connected. It's harder to hide things, and not that we're hiding things on purpose, but everything is front and center. And with the power of everything being electronic, you're able to query your TMF and all your systems with a lot more power now. And that includes the inspectors being able to really dig in. So you have to really think about taking a step back and understanding that landscape of your electronic ecosystem, right? How does everything come together? Where is your authoritative source of everything, and bringing that together? And I think one other piece where I've seen a focus, we know that regulatory agencies have focused on, we outsource as sponsors. If you're coming from the small biotech side, which I am, we outsource a lot of our activity. But at the end of the day, we're still on the hook for everything. So even more so in this electronic world that we live in, how are you showing that oversight of the vendors? How are you, and it's starting all the way back from your qualification of the vendors, all the way through of providing or documenting, right, your oversight. It's not enough to just say you're providing oversight, but how can you show it, right? If it's not documented, it didn't exist. And then how do you properly close that out and wrap everything up in a bow and put it on the shelf until you actually do have inspectors there? So we'll dig into some more of these topics, I know, as we go on, but hopefully that is a good start.
And I'd like to tag on to what Jay is saying. The advancement in technology, changes in regulatory frameworks, and shifts in industry practice have really changed the regulatory inspections over the year. And it's that digital footprint that they're looking at now, which makes us focus more on Part 11 compliance and the focus on validations, access controls, and audit trails. In addition to that, some of the changes that I'm seeing is collaboration with the international counterparts. For example, joint inspections, mutual recognition agreements like with the EMA, which is allowing us to ensure compliance across borders. Two other things that are really important is the agencies are taking a risk-based inspection model into consideration, where they focus on facilities and products that pose the greatest risk to public health. And last but not the least, there's an increased emphasis on quality system regulations, where they're not only making sure that you are compliant, but what is the effectiveness of your quality system.
Mario, I think you had some experience with access. Do you want to share a little bit about that, how that's changed for you?
Yes, absolutely. So for me, is especially EMA and MHRA, right? They want on-fader access to the TMF. They want to make sure that they're not trained. So when they come in, they say, "Don't train me. Give me access to your system, and I should be able to navigate to the system." And lately, after COVID, what we've seen also is that inspectors are looking for remote access, right? So they want to be able to open up the system. They come back and send us some pre-work with an agenda of what they want to see, and they just want to be able to navigate to the system. So those are the changes that I've seen, which is at the beginning in my early stages of my career is all paper, but now is give me access, don't trade me, and make sure that I'm able to get into the system, be able to get wherever I want to be.
Thank you. And I think Helen just gave us a shout out from the audience. Inspectors are performing more in-depth analysis remotely ahead of time. It's very true. Right? We've all seen where they want access in advance. And so when they come to you, they're very prepared with their questions. Let's move on to another question. In your recent inspection experience, what type of systems access did the inspector request as part of it? So we mentioned that they're getting into the system. Which systems are they predominantly looking to access?
So I can jump into that, Donna. For us, they wanted to look at the entire TMF. They were happy to have someone from our team navigate, but we literally sat next to them and took them wherever they wanted to go. So in addition to that, they're beginning to look at audit trails, validation records. All of that is becoming extremely important.
When we talked, I know Sharon's having some challenges getting in from an audio perspective, but I just she raised a really good point, is that they're looking from system to system. They're actually telling the story across multiple systems, and they're looking at a couple of things. They're looking for consistency of the story, right? Are they getting one story from one system, another story from another system? And then they want to know, like, what's your authoritative source, like Anjali mentioned. I think it's important that you be planning for these audit trails. And so let's talk a little bit about audit trails, because I think each of you had some experiences to share in terms of the types of audit trails that they were looking at, and what were they looking at in the audit trails?
I know one example. I know, unfortunately, like Donna said, our colleague Sharon is having some technical difficulties, but she had discussed just the example of finding, how you track your drug, right? So we know clinical supply and going through the multiple systems. That's one that happens usually to touch multiple systems. So it goes back to how are you selecting and qualifying vendors, and maybe that, or selecting and qualifying your site pharmacy, and that is probably in the TMF in a site qualification visit. And then they want to go through the conduct of the study, and that might be in your IRT system. So going from system to system, the inspector's finding how you properly selected and trained a pharmacy, and that might be in your TMF, then wanting to see how are those actions, how is that drug being dispensed, reconciled, during follow-up visits, how is it being reconciled and then destroyed properly or returned, and then closing out the study right at the end. If it's not a mid-study inspection, when it's all wrapped up, how does that get closed out? And that would be back in your TMF. So jumping from system to system, and maybe they want to see that if there was an SAE related to, and there was a dose mod, now you're going into potentially the safety database. So it's very easy if you think about just a simple flow of drug supply, how you could touch. I just named 4 different systems, and we could probably add a couple more there if you go down a rabbit hole. That's really not uncommon. I think one thing that the other piece I'll talk here is systems like the IRT or some of your other systems, you might, I know what we do, you might archive them, and you want to plan in advance for an inspection. What are you going to do, right? If you are at the end of a study, you don't need to keep all your systems live, but how will you provide access to an inspector if they want to see the flow of things? Sometimes it's more than just an audit trail. So having that pre-planning and thinking about how are you going to be able to give the inspector that experience that they're going to ask to go from system to system, to watch the trail of a patient or to watch the trail of a vial of drug through the different systems when a SAE occurs, when a dose modification occurs. IRT might not be live. Maybe your safety database was archived. You need to think in advance about these issues.
In addition to that, I think it's really critical to, when you're doing your vendor qualification and you're setting up your vendor, that you follow all the requirements of Part 11, because that's what's going to ensure that they are validated, their systems are validated. You do that when you're implementing them to speak to all your systems, not when you're notified that there's an inspection. So it's also very critical to make sure that your contract speaks to how you will handle the system and the platform. If, like Jay mentioned, you do have to archive it and then retrieve it for an inspection, how are you going to do that? All of this needs to be spelled up upfront in your contract. It does take resources, both in manpower and finances. So to do this properly, you must plan ahead, and there should never be any surprises.
Yeah, and for me, adding to that is setting the expectations with the vendors up front, right? You are selecting them. You need to set those expectations early. So engage them, and they need to be your partners when it comes to identifying, evaluating the different risks for the study. So having a great partnership not only helps you with managing the expectations, but it helps you with your oversight, right? That's another area that inspectors are looking for, is how do we have oversight of our vendors? We don't want to wait until that inspection to highlight deficiencies. Instead, you want to engage proactively and early. Is the vendor doing everything that they needed to do in relationship to the contract? That's the question that we need to ask ourselves. And are they compliant with those SOPs and regulations? So overall, it's just tying the whole knot in relationship to managing the inspection.
And I think,
thank you. Oh, go ahead, Jay.
I was just going to follow on. So thinking about that and the actual providing access and how are you going to potentially show the flow through the different systems, I think we also want to be mindful of who's going to be doing that, right? So if they're getting very technical, which sometimes they do, right? And I saw one of the comments from the audience about how the EMA likes to focus on process, and that's very true. What are the processes that you have set up to set up user accounts, the user administration, how everything's connected and talking to one another, the UAT, right? All this very more technical aspect. And from a clinical operations perspective, for example, if they're going to start to ask me what safeguards we put in place or how did we go through X, Y, and Z in the actual technical setup of some of these systems, or maybe where they're stored on our cloud, I might very quickly look and say, you know what, bring in my IT person. But sometimes you might be too quick to jump to that IT person because maybe they're not the perfect person to answer that question. So making sure you understand who are your SMEs and really asking clarifying questions from the inspectors when they are asking potentially very technical questions. Is it your operations people or is it your IT folks? And sometimes it's a mix of both, but finding the right SME to put in front of the inspector to talk about something like an audit trail can really go very well, or it could also potentially derail an inspection and really, unfortunately, leave the inspector feeling like you have less control than maybe you really do, because you didn't have the right person sitting in front of that inspector talking to that technical aspect.
So Jay, you raised a really good point, and that's preparing your SMEs, right? Your subject matter experts. So what are some strategies you guys use in terms of identifying who's going to speak to a topic and then actually preparing them to talk to that particular topic?
All right.
So
I had to change devices to my iPad, and then it finally worked.
Nice. So I'll just take a pause right there. I'm going to welcome Sharon, who was extremely persistent in trying to get on. And we are really happy to have you. Sharon, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. VP Global Head of Clinical Operations at my current company. Previously, I was the Senior Director and Clinical Operations Lead on a program that went through pivotal studies, phase 3 inspections, mock inspections, real inspections, and got approval, and then got acquired by a larger biotech company. So I'm able to speak to that recent experience.
Awesome. Great. So we were just talking about preparing your subject matter experts. What are some things that you need to keep in mind around who you pick to talk to a topic, and then how do you make sure they're ready to talk to the topic? So do you want to start by taking that question, since
Sure.
we'd love to hear from you?
So obviously one wants to pick individuals who are good communicators, who know not to answer more than the question asked, that are able to understand and follow the basic interview skills, which not everyone can do. And we also, there can be times when, because of turnover, because of time passing, there isn't an ideal person for each spot needed. And so as an inspection lead, you just need to do your best to work with that person, meet with them, go over storyboards, go over where documents are kept, and find a compromise in those situations.
And, to add to what Sharon said, very important, why are we picking them as an SME? We must have their qualifications, both in training and experience, their job descriptions available, just to give the why of why they are speaking to you on the topic. And I agree with Sharon completely that it's very important to plan in advance who's going to be speaking to what, have mock sessions with the SME so that they're prepared to speak in front of the inspector on point to what the inspector is asking for.
So anybody else want to add anything? All right, you said that magic word, that 4-letter word, mock. So let's talk mock for a few minutes. So been in companies where they want to do mock inspections like 3 weeks after enrollment starts. So what are your guys' thoughts on mock inspections, like just the approach to a mock? And then when is the best time for a mock inspection? What have you found valuable in that? Anybody want to go first?
I'll start. On the study that I worked on, I inherited the study of just a couple months before the first mock inspection, which was, for the most part, almost at the end of conduct of the study. I would kind of recommend doing it a little bit sooner than that, just so that the lessons learned of the wider group understanding the importance of doing things contemporaneously can really sink in time to apply it while the study's really going. I think I don't think the very beginning of a project is the right time, but I think somewhere like at the start of maintenance might be a good time, but enough so that the lessons can be applied over a significant chunk of conduct is what I would prefer.
And I think that has so much value because you can implement whatever corrections are found. Kind of sort of a hybrid situation. I know Jay and I had conflicting opinions a little bit on it, but I think a hybrid role would be the best, where let them do what they want for the mock inspection, find what they unravel, and then towards the end, maybe the last couple of days, we can tell them where the landmines are so that they can prep our team. One very important thing to know over here is it is a learning experience. The goal is not to have a pristine mock inspection so the teams don't learn anything, but to find where our issues are, where are our landmines, and no finger pointing. Just put your documentation in place, learn from it, grow from it, and be ready for your inspection.
And I think that, so for me, it's also semantics, maybe people, and so the difference between a gap assessment and a mock inspection, I think sometimes they get interchanged. And I think even maybe our panel just did that potentially, or at least the way I'm interpreting it. So I always like to put all the assumptions on the table and be really clear, right? So what Sharon was talking about, kind of doing it during the maintenance, I would actually call it gap assessment, where you're going through and you're looking through what are risks, where do we fall short on documentation, are we falling short on process, what could be potential holdup or hangups during an inspection, what are those landmines, as Anjali just called them. But a mock inspection, in my mind, is actually going through the full steps, having a back room, having a mock inspector. And I would argue, and listen, there's a reason why Donna put together this panel. We all have slightly differing backgrounds and opinions here, and there's no right or wrong, which is the fun part of inspection readiness, in my opinion. But I think doing an actual mock closer to the end of the study, when you know you're potentially preparing for an inspection, is more valuable. Yes, doing a gap assessment, as Sharon said, during the actual conduct of the study, so you can apply lessons learned, is important. But actually going through the full, like having a back room, having a mock inspector, going through the full kind of show, I would argue, at least in my opinion, is more valuable coming in at the end.
Yeah, one more thing I could add to that is that mock inspections could oftentimes become a finger pointing exercise. We want to avoid that. This needs to be a learning opportunity where we find the gap, we find the issue, and we learn from it. The other part of this is that for the MAC, really make sure that you're taking good notes and that you are identifying those risks so that you're able to communicate to the organization what we need to focus on. It's always important to provide positive feedback to the teams, right? Instead of finger pointing. And then overall addressing what is important. What are the negatives that we found on the inspection? As an example, the TMF needs to be worked on. Then overall, let's just come back with a plan, set up an initiative to make sure that you are identifying those areas of improvement, you finding those areas that need to become more effective, and then overall improving and understanding your staff so that we're meeting the regulatory requirements. This helps us boost confidence, and then overall how we manage inspections.
And I see one of the questions is how do you go about preparing for a mock? So if you're preparing in the US using the FDA's BIMO manual, so that's a really good place. And this is a lesson. This is a real life example. This is from a number of years ago, but we had a junior inspector who actually used to work on the agricultural division that was assigned to come do a biotech, a pharma pre-approval inspection. And this inspector literally would take the BIMO manual and go, like, you could sit in the back room and knew where he was going to ask next because he was going point by point by the manual. That's always a good place. If your organization's naive and you're looking for a place to start, open that BIMO manual and for inspections and just go step by step. That's not necessarily a bad way to at least take a first initial pass at it. There's definitely consultants and firms out there that can also provide guidance and other examples. The other thing is to storyboard. I think we talked about that. That was one of the poll questions. But to that point that Anjali was saying, that we have slightly differing opinions on how much do you prepare or how much do you give the mock inspector your known issues versus letting them go through the natural course of an inspection and find them on their own. You want to pressure test both sides. You want to find the unknown, but you also want to make sure that those storyboarded issues, your known issues, are also well thought out and you have a good story to tell them. So if they do come up during an inspection, that's something that is well practiced and you can make your way through. But more importantly, I find the value of mock inspections is to find the unknowns. We all are really good at finding our knowns, right? We've storyboarded them, but what else? There has to be other skeletons in the closet that we all overlooked, that we forgot about, or even better yet, we haven't talked about when staff turns over. So you're sitting in front of running an inspection, but you weren't here during the actual conduct of the study. That introduces a new challenge.
I'll just add to what Jay said on the topic of storyboards. It's good before the CSR is done to have evidence that you thoughtfully considered which things need to be discussed in the CSR, which things need to be reported to an ethics committee or whatnot in a timely way. That's nice to be able to show. And so contemporaneous work on storyboards help keep records of things like that, or keep on tabs of your records.
I think the one thing we can all agree on is that a mock inspection should be a learning experience for everybody. And it's really important from the most senior executive levels in an organization on down that mock really be treated as an opportunity to learn. I think that's absolutely critical. Maybe let's move on to another question, if you don't mind. I know, just to make it a quick, we talked a little bit about involving your CROs in your inspection. And if any of you have some thoughts on when, do you pull your CROs into the inspection? Are they in the inspection room with them, with you? What's the role?
I'll jump in. I know we talked about this in prep. When we did our mock inspections, the way we trained, the expectation was that the sponsor has to be responsible for knowing the study well enough to answer the questions. So we didn't involve our CROs directly, but if we needed their support with document retrieval or to answer a question that we just were at a stalemate on, we had them sort of on speed dial. In the actual inspection, it was after an acquisition and we were integrated into a much larger organization. And they, in fact, required CRO key personnel to travel to be on site in the back room. They weren't inspector facing, but they required them to be physically present during the week.
And I just want to add to that everybody should be aware that at the end of the day, it's the sponsor that's responsible for the study. There are times when the inspector will not allow anyone other than the sponsor in the room. So you have to make sure that you can defend and speak to any of the questions that are being asked by the inspector by the sponsor team. You can have the CRO representatives in the back room, but they may not be allowed in the front room. So be prepared for that.
I would say be fit for purpose, right? So understand what was your setup. Was the CRO managing your TMF and you kind of just provided oversight by doing, regular QCs? And I know I've worked at companies where that was our approach. We didn't have the internal team to really manage that. If that's the case, you want your CRO in the back room going through and finding those documents for you because they know it better than you do. I could pretty much guarantee that. Now, is that right or wrong? That's a different topic, but having them in the back room 100%, in my opinion, 100 out of 100 times you want your CRO on site. They'll be able to help point you in directions or remind you of things. Having an extra set of hands that actually went through the study, especially if they're the staff that were there during the conduct, can only help you. I agree with Anjali though. Don't expect them to be allowed in front of the inspectors. It's back room only.
So that's a great segue into oversight, right? What are you guys seeing in terms of regulators expecting the sponsor to have oversight? How do we demonstrate that we've had that oversight?
Audits, good, robust audit reports of having managed your vendor, quality agreements and contracts in place initially, where you're literally putting down what the expectations are on both sides. And when I mention audits, the follow-up on audits. So if there are critical issues, were they mitigated and were they mitigated correctly? That's critical.
I'll add to that. In our case, we had a written vendor oversight plan, a sponsor authored document that described a bunch of tasks. And one of our learnings is that when it was initially crafted, it was a bit idealistic. And so it assigned us tasks that it actually wasn't possible to do in some cases. So I would say be really careful about that. But having a plan and showing the specific checks that you're doing, what proportion of monitoring reports you're going to review can be a nice way of doing it. In the actual inspection, examples included, there was a trend of some labs being canceled, and the inspector wanted to see the sponsor's involvement in handling that and decision making and what to do about it. And we were able to show meeting minutes, site-facing re-education that was authored by the sponsor at the end, resolution of the issue. But any documentation showing the sponsor making the decisions, approving plans, writing things to resolve issues was something that the inspector was interested in following to resolution.
Another example is we had an inspector that took the path of a CRO raised in trend of protocol deviation. So they started off asking us for the SOP on how you manage protocol deviations. So we handed that over. our SME said, talk through, this is how it was actually conducted. We followed the SOP. And then part of that was responding or making our own conclusion as a sponsor in regards to what the CRO concluded on. So then they asked for an example, actually 2 examples. So we had to find 2 different examples. And this is, once again, having the CRO in the background, being able to say, all right, let's pull this one and this one. And we happened to storyboard around protocol deviations, but they were able to, we provided 2. And then the inspector asked us to walk through, show us the email communication, show us the meeting minutes that you received it. And then what decision did you make? How is it documented? Where was it documented? What follow-up action? So there's multiple different day-to-day study team activities that this could be applicable inspection paths.
There were 2
another area. Oh, go ahead, Anjali. Go ahead.
Please go ahead, Mario, please.
Yeah, another area is just making sure that you're looking at your level of risk with a risk-based approach, right? What are those processes that are critical that you need to identify, right? And as you identify and look at through the processes, right? Is it the CRO selection? Is it the management? Is it the medical monitoring? Is it the clinical monitoring? Or have you had issues with startup? So again, we have alluded a little bit to storyboarding and making sure that we are doing different things for the organization. But overall, let's take a risk-based approach and then overall develop a plan out of that.
And who can go ahead.
Sorry, Donna, 2 very important things that I quickly want to add over here, and I think Pam is alluding to it in the from the audience, is document. Because if you don't document it, it didn't happen. So, and you can't prove it to an inspector. So your oversight is only as good as your documentation. So make sure you have that. And another pain point that I do sometimes hear from industry with regards vendor oversight is whose SOPs are they following? Are they following their own, or are they following the sponsors? That needs to be documented in the contract or quality agreement, whatever document you have in place, because if they're following the sponsors' SOPs, they need to be able to speak to them and be accountable for everything the sponsor SOPs say.
And after all, it is TMF week, right? So just a plug for making sure your TMF is complete. I always say that the TMF is kind of the window into the quality of the study. If you're missing the protocol training, it could be because it didn't get collected, but it could also be because it wasn't being done, right? So keeping good oversight of your TMF throughout the life of your study, I think really helps you find the problems earlier. So I think those are all really good points. Mario, a minute ago, you mentioned storyboarding, and I think we talked quite a bit about storyboarding in our preparation. So I know each of you had some really good thoughts. So Jay, I'll ask you to start, if you would, your thoughts on storyboarding.
Yeah, thank you. So for me, the storyboards they need to be created, right, properly. And they're a tool to be able to summarize any of the issues that we're encountering. Overall, a storyboard, we talk about risk and we talk about CAPAs. A storyboard should give you some of those legs with those CAPAs and the issues that we're finding. And overall, it's a messaging. It's a messaging process that we're telling the inspectors and we're telling ourselves that we're in good shape, right? So if we found an issue, let's pick on TMF issue and the TMF specific to TMF. The storyboard can provide a framework for clear messaging that is easily communicated to the inspectors. So my other colleagues also talked about that in preparation for that. You want to assign somebody within that organization, talking about TMF as an example, who will be able to represent a storyboard, but also engage others, because there will be other storyboards that will be created, and you want to make sure that we're connecting the dots. So overall, develop the right templates for the storyboard, that you have succinct storyboarding, and your organization, making sure that your organization is really targeting those areas of risk. And do not wait. I think the other colleagues talked about this. Start early, right? Start now. Start very early and start developing the storyboards. I've become a great storyteller, as a matter of fact. So overall, it's just do it yourself, do it early, and you're going to have a very successful inspection.
I agree, and I would say there's no such thing as a perfect study, right? So as issues arise, as you're going through, that's a perfect time, and it's easier said than done. But nominate someone, whether it's yourself or someone else, to take the time to schedule a kind of postmortem and create a storyboard, or at least start it, right? At least create a running list of known storyboardable issues, and they could be a one big quality event or a trending in things like I mentioned earlier, protocol deviations. One protocol deviation or a handful of protocol deviations won't necessarily grant the need for a storyboard. But if you have 10,000 protocol deviations in a small phase 2 study, that might be something you might want to talk about and have a game plan. And what's the purpose of storyboarding, right? It's to organize your thoughts, to make sure that it's kind of like your checklist, to make sure that you have a aligned cross-functional alignment on what happened, what's our position on it, and how are we going to tell that story? What's the document? What's in the TMF or the other authoritative sources to show what happened? So when we all win the lottery and we're not here during the inspection, the team that's taking over for us can then tell that story appropriately with that documentation. I think storyboards, one of the common questions I get asked when I talk about storyboards is, well, what can you share a template? What does it look like? And it could be really anything, right? So I've used a wide range, and I've even used within an organization different types of storyboards. It could be a position paper, so a Word document where you're kind of just telling the story, and you have hyperlinks to your TMF on where the different sources of information are. I personally am a fan of slide decks. So PowerPoint presentations that have the executive summary. So what's the elevator speech in 1 or 2 minutes or less? What is the top to bottom? What are we talking about in this? What was the issue? What's our position? What's the risk? How are we going to mitigate the risk? And then it goes into details. You know, what's the background on it? You have a slide with all the links. Once again, I'm a big fan of linking it to your TMF, because if it comes up during an actual inspection, instead of first having to find it, you already have it kind of pre-pinned, right? You have all the hyperlinks to all your TMF documents that you're ready to hand over. You're kind of staging your known issues via these storyboards. That's been a really successful approach or technique that I've used.
Yeah, in addition to what Jay is saying, the other piece of this is that organizations, oftentimes we have a high turnover rate, right?
Yes.
So overall, let's think about that as well. That knowledge level when a person leaves the organization and transfer their information to the new person is often gone. However, if you come back with a good storyboard, as Jay has delineated, sort of a good template, you're going to be able to continue to tell the story from the beginning all the way to the end.
Mario, you read my mind completely. I was going to say that. And in addition to that, I really like the word Jay used, which is aligned. That's really critical, because sometimes two people interpret the same situation differently. And we don't want them to be misaligned in front of the inspector. So the storyboard allows everybody to tell the story the way it happened, but everybody kind of regrouping so that people are not stating the facts of the event differently. We don't change any of the facts, but they don't state it differently. Everybody's aligned in the thought pattern, and that's critical.
And I saw a comment asking, are the storyboards, sorry, Mario, are the storyboards meant for the inspector? And my answer is no, they're meant for the internal team. So they're not filed in the TMF. They're not part of the record. They're a standalone outside of the study. It's really a preparation tool, right? It's to gain that internal alignment, because it's not that, and Angelique couldn't have said it more clear, right? We're not changing the facts. We all have the best intentions. We're all stating the truth, but everyone has a different perspective. DM is going to view it differently than medical, differently than clinical, different than safety. And that slightly different perspective can come off to an inspector as maybe we are trying to hide something, or maybe we are not following the process, even though we actually did. So it's really important. And let's be real, a lot of times these events happened many years ago, so our memory might be a little off. So allowing that alignment and that storyboarding, and that's the one source of truth in this order. Here's how it happened. That shows the way, is really important cross-functionally, not just for that core clinical team. And I know, listen, I sit in ClinOps, so I think the world revolves around me. So
I agree with everything everyone said. I'll just add to that sometimes there's a hesitancy or a learning curve of the extended cross-functional team to get used to writing things like this, or get used to navigating TMF for that matter. But it's not that hard. And so I feel like early on, just investing in, like, don't make them self-study something, spend time with them, show them the elements that you need to do. And then once that's understood, as you're working new issues, as they come up, you can just be filling in the storyboard as you go. But in my experience, it's just that learning curve, getting people used to what it is so that they're not afraid to tackle that.
I think Christine from the audience asked about when is the right time to start the storyboard. And, the best time to start is the minute you identify that you have an issue that can roll into an avalanche. It's a small snowflake and it's going to roll into an avalanche. Start right there. Because people leave, life happens, you may not have that clarity right at the beginning. So it may be something that does not go into an avalanche, and you can, end the storyboard early. But if it does become an avalanche, at least you've got the audit trail of events.
And one thing I'll add is that you don't necessarily, in my opinion, need to do double work between a quality investigation and a storyboard. So if everything you need is in your quality investigation documentation, you don't need to craft another thing just to have.
I think that's a really good point, Sharon. I think Janice pointed out the TMF is said to tell the story, and yet we storyboard the TMF. When should all of this start? I think the caveat to this is that your storyboard is not meant to replace your TMF. And ideally, everything is clearly told in your TMF. I think the challenge can be when somebody leaves the company and that story leaves with them because the story's in their emails. And so having good process in place for getting content into your TMF on a regular basis throughout the trial is what's most critical. And then to Jay's point, your storyboard kind of just identifies those records in the TMF that can contribute to telling that story. So a storyboard is not meant to replace good, solid TMF content.
Correct.
So we have a couple of questions from the audience. I wanted to just hit on one. Is LMS a significant one in inspection? And what if the study team have delayed, I can't read that last word, but I'm thinking that's the learning management system. Is that a system that your inspectors have had asked for access to? Does anybody want to take that question?
I can. They do ask, if I'm understanding the learning management system that the audience is asking for. Yes, they do, because they do ask you for training documents. What was the training of the employee in terms of SOPs or programs that the company has? So yes, they will ask for all of those records.
And I think a comment was, give me an example of a storyboard. So training is a great storyboard topic, right? So connecting these together, hopefully for the audience, is, did you have all your trainings? And I think most of us are going to say there's going to be delayed trainings. I've never been somewhere where we've had everyone trained prior to them doing everything, right? So I think especially at smaller companies, we're kind of flying the plane or building the plane as we're flying it, or vice versa, however you want to say that. And I think storyboarding out, all right, so here's the training that we had in place before they got started, and then here's additional training. We identified gaps along the way, and we added and we supplemented training. And how did that story go? Or maybe there was a gap on how we documented and how we gave therapeutic training or protocol specific training to some of our external vendors that we are responsible for providing oversight for. And it was specific to our protocol that we maybe didn't do right off the bat, but we identified it and we plugged it in, right? It's always better as a sponsor if you identify a problem on your own and put a solution in place, rather than an inspector coming in and finding the problem and you had no idea, or even worse, you had an idea and you didn't take action to correct it.
Yeah. So we just have a couple of minutes left. You guys have been amazing. So I'm going to ask you if you had any advice to give to one of these very many people that are expecting an inspection this year, what would that advice be? So Jay, I'm going to ask you to start. If you could give somebody some advice, what would your advice be?
I would say plan early and often, start as early as possible. Today, everyone's sitting there. If you are working on a study and you haven't started thinking about inspections, start today, right? Go back to your organization. All it takes is one person to start the conversation and go back and say, hey, I think we should start storyboarding, or, how many, just even going back, engaging how experienced of a team are you working around you? I know for being at a smaller biotech, wearing that hat, it's oftentimes that many of us don't have the experience, and that's okay, right? Either find the external resource to come help you and consult with you, or identify those people that have been through it and be the champions of inspection readiness. It shouldn't be a one-time activity after you file or as you're planning to file. It should be you want to achieve that state of inspection readiness, and it really means that it's something that you have to do on a daily basis. Where our priority lists are very long, I get it, right? And it usually falls to the bottom, but carving out some time and trying to get ahead of it by doing little things. Do you have an authoritative source map? Do you have a systems map? Do you have storyboards? Little things, starting to check those little things off will help get your organization in the right mindset and building some good habits.
So I'd really like to add to that. We are in a technology age, and the regulations require you to provide everything to the inspector expediently. Part 11, 21 CFR 820 or 21 CFR 58 all mention that. So make sure that you are doing that and you're compliant. Make sure you're communicating with the inspector regularly. I do that several times during the day. And at the end of the day, before the inspector leaves, I make sure I've given them whatever they've asked for. Make sure your inspection is technologically savvy, which means that there's efficient communication between your back room and front room. Make sure your SMEs are prepared. Address your gaps. It's never too late. Taking it much to the beginning. Make sure that your infrastructure is set correctly right from the beginning. Inspection readiness should be an ongoing process.
I'll go next. I'll have 1.5 advices. One is use the tools, use the BIMO checklist, just work it down, and you'll discover the things you weren't aware of. Any other checklist tools you can get from consultants or your network. The second thing I would say is just build a good team with good team dynamics. On the day of, I don't play basketball, but I imagine it's like a team where it's like, you got the ball in here, you got this, and you pass it over here. And that facilitates getting things quickly, getting answers quickly, the stronger the teamwork is.
Mario, one last thought?
Yeah, so for me, it's Sharon, you said a lot of what I wanted to say. It's a team effort, right? And then overall, it's just remember who the inspector is focusing on, right? EMA has a different focus. MHRA has a different focus, FDA. So it's important to understand what they're going after. And then overall, at the end of the day, it's a team sport. It's a team effort. And don't leave anybody behind. We won't leave anybody behind. That's got to be one of the key elements. And we're there to help one another. If it's a TMF issue, we're going to help each other out. If it's a drug safety issue, we're not going to leave anybody out. And overall, you're going to get really ready for an inspection.
So this was awesome. I want to thank my panel here. It was a lot of fun. There's actually a new guidance that came out last week. It is from BIMO. It's not replacing the old guidance. This is just more, it's a guidance for the inspectors on how to inspect, but it's out for public comment. So I'm going to put the link in here for that so people can access that and provide your comments. Oliver, thank you to you and Paul for making this time available to us.
Pleasure.
It was a lot of fun.
Thank you guys, and thank you for bearing with us as we experienced a few technical issues. Special shout out to Sharon, who did everything imaginable to try and get on here, but made up for it with some great points. Thanks everybody for joining. It's been so great to have Donna and I met before today's session and said we wanted to put together a panel on inspections, but we wanted new voices and different voices. And I was always looking forward to this session. I found, you found a new fan in me. For everybody that's on the line here, I'm looking forward to anything else that you guys speak on in the future. But thanks so much, everybody, and we'll see you again tomorrow for another day of TMF Week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.